Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And moving right along, we talk about Spine 162, Ratcatcher, directed by Lynne Ramsay, 1999. I think I should talk very briefly about what's the basis of choosing Criterion purchases? Like when I go in and purchase one, or like how do I choose? Well, in the very beginning, it was this gradual process, and it was just a combination of titles that it was either titles. There's a few cases where there's a title that I've seen, like Rushmore was a title that I've seen that I wanted to get, and then there are other titles that I've heard about, and I think I should get, as in like building my own canon library, and those would be films like The Seventh Seal and trying to think of like the early purchases, like The Seventh Seal and well, eventually Foreigner blows through the Antoine Doinel set, and Andrei Rublev. And then and Solaris, and then there's other titles that I have no idea what they were about, just because I haven't heard of the director, or I haven't heard of it. But there's just something about it that looked really intriguing, and those were the initial. That was how I initially started, and then it just starts growing from there. The more films you see, the more directors you're aware of, and then you start kind of branching out into all kinds of areas. So eventually it just starts branching out and starts getting wider and wider. I try to at least see it once before I go in and say that I'm going to get it, but sometimes the impulse is just there. And I am somebody that most of the time I like going to an actual store. I have ordered titles online, of course. This is not, the concept is not at all unfamiliar to me, but I do like the feeling of going into a place and seeing something on the shelf and something catching my eye. There's something about being able to just walk through a shelf and then see a title and be struck by the title or the cover and just go, okay, well, what's this about? And then you read the synopsis and you kind of go, all right, there's just something about it that just strikes you. And this is one of those cases where I wasn't really quite sure what I think it was just probably that process of just going in and seeing the title and just being really interested. Although maybe this was a case where I probably rented the title, and then I liked it, and then I went out of my way to purchase it. And that's the other case, is that sometimes, more often than not, I try to rent or borrow the title from someone, either through Netflix or through the library, or through, if I knew somebody who had this, I would try to watch it in advance, and that would determine whether I should go out of my way to get it or not. But I do believe this is one of my earlier Criterion purchases. I'm not entirely sure on this, but anyways, with Ratcatcher, the first time I saw it, and this has been true the other times that I've seen this, I come away thinking that this is the Scottish 400 Blows. It's probably the best way to describe the whole film. In that it centers on, it's looking at a child, James, who's 12 years old, and he's living in this really dilapidated part of Glasgow in the 1970s, particularly 1973, and this was during the Dustman strike. So the schemes, as they were called, this particular section of Glasgow was quite poor and dilapidated. There's there's no real running water. There's no indoor toilet, and so it was already bad to begin with. But then add to this dustman strike, and then eventually, and thus the rubbish piles getting larger and larger, and thus becomes a breeding ground for rats. And this was all during the time when that section of town was going to get demolished, and then people were moving out to new estates, and then I think that probably the idea was that scheme was going to get knocked down. They were living in new estates, and then they're going to rebuild it, and that becomes the new location, and hopefully it will be better than the last one. So really, it's this very, very depressing part of town. I was talking with somebody about a good friend of mine, interestingly enough, named Evan. One of the topics we like talking about is the British Isles, and I think we were talking about like how we describe Scotland, and I think in the course of it we've concluded that Glasgow the equivalent of Glasgow would be Detroit. So just imagine Detroit, and that kind of gives you an idea of just how kind of depressing it can be. Maybe that's a little bit too harsh. Perhaps maybe I think we also said it might be Chicago, like Glasgow may be the Chicago of Scotland. I forget what we said about Edinburgh. Maybe it was Boston, maybe it was New York. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was. But I do remember mentioning Detroit, and I do believe we also mentioned Chicago as being possible equivalents. So anyway, so yeah, I see this as the Scottish 400 blows. What do I mean by the Scottish 400 blows? Well, considering that I will talk about 400 blows in the near future, I will say this, that it's basically, when I think of 400 blows, I think about a film about childhood in a very honest and frank way, and preferably with very little saccharine whatsoever. It's not looking at childhood in a fun way or in a whimsical way, or oh, wasn't that great, or oh, this really, really sucks. And the worst environment it is, the bleaker it is. And what bleaker environment you could choose than Glasgow in the 1970s? Yes, I know that I was not born in the 1970s, and I certainly didn't grow up in Glasgow. So this is all, I get that this is all vicarious living, and I don't have it. It's not the same as if someone actually grew up on it. So I understand that. I'm not making any claims that I know exactly what it's like to live in that environment. In fact, part of cinema is a way of, I think cinema at its best is when, particularly if you're going for something like realism or evoking realism, is you are portraying an environment or a circumstance or a situation as genuinely and honestly as possible, and with also some air for the artistic, attention to color, attention to composition, attention to the art aspects, and present it in an interesting and captivating way, so that so for anyone who didn't grow up in Glasgow in the 1970s could at least get some sense of what it's like. Films do not make one an expert. Just because you've seen Schindler's List does not mean that you've experienced the Holocaust. That is completely different. Seeing a film does not make you, and much less that watching a James Bond film suddenly makes you an expert in espionage. In fact, I think if anything, watching James Bond films does not make you an expert in espionage. It actually makes you, if you actually try to act like James Bond, you probably either come off as an idiot and or dead. So, but seeing a film does give you a sense of what it was like, and you come away with an impression. And perhaps this gives you a sense of, this could give you a better appreciation of what you have. It could give you a better window into what other people are suffering through, and thus will hopefully make you more of a compassionate person, a more open person, a more understanding person. You don't let certain biases or certain preconceptions get in the way of practicing virtue. And that's really the point. I mean, and I think this is one of those films that does it particularly well. And so, again, calling this the Scottish 400 Blows, it gives you that sense of what childhood was partly like, and then in particular what a childhood was like growing up in this particular situation, this living in this sort of squalor of a scheme that's getting more and more garbage, and everything about it is nasty. And there's a canal nearby that is really sort of the centerpiece of this whole story. It starts with James is playing with a friend of his, and they get into this fight, and he drowns this other guy. And so one of the things that happens is that James, and in a certain sense, James is responsible for all this. I mean, I don't think there was any real malicious intent, but he was more or less responsible for his drowning. And so this is him dealing with that guilt and dealing with that burden. And this is on top of everything else. And over the course of the film, you learn what he has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. His family, he has two older. He has an older sister, and I think the other sister is. I want to say she's younger than him. I think she's younger than him. So he's the middle child, and the only son. His mom is, he lives with his mom. His da is sort of a heavy drinker and not really kind of there, and so there's he befriends someone who he befriends a girl, Margaret Ann, who it's like the only good part of the only good thing that you really see is just the moments that they have together, and what she has to deal with, she has to put up with a lot of abuse from a local gang. This includes what amounts to sexual abuse, bordering on rape, is what she has to go. So yeah, already this is quite this is quite charmer of a film. So yeah, the situation is quite bleak. The other thing that's really fascinating about it is the color scheme. It uses a lot of cool colors, a lot of blues, a lot of greens. It just has this very, very cold, almost winter feeling, and I believe this is also taking place during the summer. But there's a lot of overcast. There's this haze, and it's just, you feel like there's no sun at all coming into this, and the few times where there is a sun, it's actually far away from this particular scheme. It's in supposedly this new estates that they're going to move to, and that's the other sort of motivation that James has is this belief that they're going to move out, they're going to move to a better place. It's there's going to be running water, there's going to be a toilet, there's going to be possibly there's a yard and fields to play in, and it's just going to be much, much better. And so that's the dream that he holds on to, this wish. That's the only thing that keeps him going. And this is a classic case where that hope gets crushed in so many ways. Not directly, not explicitly, but it seems like it's never going to arrive. And it's the feeling that every day it gets worse. It keeps getting worse, and it's not going to get any better. In fact, if anything, it's just going to keep getting worse. And in so many words, he does reach a breaking point. And it's it's that kind of film. It's that kind of experience. So if you haven't seen this, I would prepare yourself for that. It is one of those films. But this is, I think it's, I think certainly if you like the 400, if you've seen the 400 Blows and you like those types of films where it's a more honest, no rose-colored glass. I mean, there's, like I said, the colors. I mean, first off, the color scheme. It's all mostly blues and greens. So obviously, there's no rose-colored glasses whatsoever in there at all. If you like those kind of films, it's definitely up on your alley. And it is. I mean, even though this film has been around for 14 years or so, and Lynne Ramsay has been around for quite a while. She's done a few films since then. I haven't seen her other films. I would like to, but I haven't gotten to that yet. But this was her debut feature, and so I don't know. I can't really comment about really her and what she's done since then, and whether that continues. But definitely what you get, I know from this film in particular, you get a photograph, a strong sense of photography. And she actually did, she approached filmmaking more from the standpoint of photography. So for her, image is very important, and the composition and the color, and that comes through. She's also interested in some genuineness and authenticity. So there is some things that feel more improvised. They feel more naturally played as opposed to following a script. It's not to say that there aren't scripted moments and that there wasn't a script written for it. There was, but it's that combination of, or that balance between working with something that's deliberately constructed and perhaps maybe contrived in some sense, but also on the other side something that feels more real and authentic, and that this genuinely happened. So it's striking that balance, and I think that film does it particularly well. And yes, this does have subtitles. The Scottish is quite heavy, and yes, you don't even have to tell it to turn it on. It turns it on by default. So yes, the subtitles are quite a welcome affair, and it gets you to hear what Obviously, it's not general Scottish. It is very particular to Glasgow, and there is a difference between the English and the Scottish English that's spoken in Glasgow compared to other parts of Scotland like Edinburgh and so on. But yeah, I think the best way you can describe this is it's a Scottish 400 Blows, and if that sounds appealing to you, then by all means definitely check it out. Yes, it is quite bleak in terms of the story and the situation, but sometimes you do need those moments. And I will say this: I like darker films. I appreciate darker films and with protagonists that are not entirely sympathetic, or situations that it feels like you just want to crawl into bed and actually have the covers be completely over you, and you feel like completely the opposite of what's happening right now. Like, imagine the sun is not there at all. It's just all overcast. It's all bleak and everything. I do appreciate those kinds of stories, and I think I do lean more to those types of stories, but I also do like to balance it out. I do like to have some more upbeat stuff, and over the course of this, you'll find that there are other more upbeat films to see. So it's not all entirely bleak and everything. So, but this is definitely one of those more darker type films. So just be forewarned if you do check it out. So So yeah, that's Ratcatcher. And until next time, take care.